most employable ever, because all of a sudden you have this whole new skill set of being self-starters, which I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't know what that means, but in my job interview, of course I'm a self-starter. I feel like this is probably the group of the most motivated self-starting people. So I applaud all of you.
Well, I think we can get started. I have a few quick things to get to before you get to your presentation.
I was wondering if we were going to do the announcements beforehand or after, Jenna.
I figured before. I don't know.
I think before makes sense.
I'll go into presentation mode. Okay. So, as you all know, our OWL elections are coming up. Our banquet is April 28th. And that's where voting will occur. So officially we're announcing who is running. So our presidential candidates will be Claire Doyle and Bruce Pollock. For vice president, we have Ethan Schaefer. And then for secretary treasurer, we have Riley Bynum. So members in good members in good standing will be able to vote for that. Again, it's on April 28th. We also have a few other things going on. Our next HOOT meeting is April 24th. So message Victor if you want to get involved with that and learn about coding and all those fun things that we do in meteorology. Thank you for everyone who came to Big Event. It was a lot of fun, both in person and virtual. We had a big turnout, so that was great to see. If you're thinking about joining the OWL board next year, but you don't want to be an exec position like the ones I just listed, reach out to Sean. He can talk you through all of our different branches. We have a media branch, we have an outreach branch, we have just about anything you would be interested in. So if you want to know more about that.
The board is 12 members. Only 3 are voted. So there's a lot of positions available if you're interested.
Yeah, and some of us will be graduating, so there'll be positions that open up as well. And big news, we will likely be able to be in person for meetings and shifts and stuff starting in the fall. So this comes with, the National Weather Center has to confirm all of that and such, but it's looking very likely. So you guys should be excited to finally experience OWL as it should be experienced. So without further ado.
I was just going to say, it's still up in the air, but right now guidance is at least limited return.
Okay, so we'll see.
I will send out updates as I get more info, which we'll hope will be before August.
Right, so keep an eye out for that, but be hopeful, maybe, possibly. Anyway, I'm really excited for this talk for you guys. Liz, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to come.
I'm excited. I will admit, as I was kind of going through this, trying to find all the pretty radar pictures, the rest of my weather team kept looking over. They're like, oh, so what are we using this for? What questions do we have? So there was a hand from the rest of my weather team in this. I will admit too, this is my first time that I'm going to try to share a screen. So I'm sorry in advance if I'm showing a lack of technical ability in some capacities. Wait, try this.
I'm like, Liz, that's part of the reason I joined the meetings.
I know. I was like, Sean, I'm gonna need help. Okay, let me see. As I'm saying that, I was like, oh wait, I just have to hit share screen, right?
Yeah, just share screen.
Okay. Share. Uh-oh. Open your Zoom preferences. I guess I should have gone over this with you first.
Oh, you have a Mac. Yes, you have to give permission.
Okay.
You do not have to restart Zoom though, even though it tells you you need to.
Okay. I was like, oh no, it's saying that I need to close out of here.
See, this is why I thought I should have texted you about this stuff.
I know. I was like, I knew better than to just do this. I'm sorry in advance. You know what? New plan. Is there a way that I can just forward someone else the? No, I'm struggling. I'm sorry, guys.
No, you're totally fine. If you want to email it to either Sean or myself, we can share it.
Yeah, I was going to say you can just send it to me and Jenna.
Chain.
Okay, let me try this. See if it works better. We're gonna close out of here. the moment of like, this is gonna work and it's gonna be great. So the first part is the introduction. So I guess you can say that while I'm trying to get my stuff together. I'm Liz McGiffin, and I work for the NBC affiliate in Columbus, Ohio. And let me see, I'm a University of Missouri grad. I have two sisters. One of them, my youngest sister went to Texas, but the one who's a year ahead of her taught me first that horns always go down. So she is also an Oklahoma grad. And I was able, even though I was the person who graduated from the school that's known for their journalism program, came out with a meteorology degree. My sister Amy graduated from Oklahoma with the journalism side. And let me see. Anyone with the link, apply. Okay. In theory, Jenna, I think a link was sent to you. So I'm gonna try again to send this to Sean. I also am unfortunately proof right now that it's important to make sure that you have top-notch skills on how current technology works, because that is something that you will be able to continually use.
Okay, yeah, I just got it. So
oh good. Will it open? It kind of seemed like it was giving me attitude about sending to someone outside of my network.
Yeah, it just opened for me. Okay.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you.
It just yells. It doesn't stop you from sharing out of network.
Okay, well, that's good. So, yay. Okay. So thanks in advance, Jenna. So, so here's a picture of my whole team. And then the next slide kind of shows the big talking points of what I just said too. Is I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio, but in forecasting roles and really in most meteorology roles and anything in weather, water, climate, you usually have to go to where the job is. So I've had the fun opportunity of living and working in Columbia, Missouri. So started on air in my college town, then hopped over to St. Joseph, Missouri, in kind of the northwest corner of Missouri. And then my first full-time weather gig took me all the way to the West Coast, where I went to Medford, Oregon. And I'd say, especially if you are interested in forecasting, obviously, you probably have some interest in tornadoes if you ended up in Oklahoma. But it's very interesting if you have an opportunity to spend some time in an area and a climate where you're not familiar with. I was not very familiar with fire weather, realized how much I didn't realize about inversions in valley fog until I lived on the West Coast, and just the impact of how different the weather can be different places when I lived there. But apparently I missed Tornado Alley too much, because then my next move was to Springfield, Missouri, back down to the Ozarks, and now I'm in Columbus. Next. And so now's the fun part. I tried to load this with a few things from the tornado outbreak and tried to show you kind of my view. So on the next slide, may just literally say the same thing, but my view. Oh, wait. So before we get to what my view looks like, here's kind of the overview. If you're not familiar, this was on Memorial Day. So on Memorial Day itself of 2019, when there was a tornado outbreak across the state of Ohio, especially on really the western half. And Columbus, if you're not familiar, is pretty much right in the middle of the state. So the majority happened over toward the Dayton area, but obviously as it moved from west to east, it was really impacting us as well. So the biggest one, and really the Dayton tornado that most of you guys are thinking about, would be that one account of the Ef3 damage. There were 3, by the time they adjusted some of the damage and gave the final report, 3 reports of Ef3 and Ef2 damage, and 6 reports of the Ef1 and Ef0 damage. And one thing that was especially unique about this is, first of all, holiday weekends, one of the last things that was on most people's mind is what the weather's actually doing. And on top of that, it was in the middle of the night when most of these storms really started to get going. So I think on the next slide, I have the track of probably the exciting one, the one that rolled through Montgomery County of that Ef3 damage. And some of the remarks, so this initially, after the National Weather Service went out to survey it, was listed as a high-end Ef3 tornado. And then I think it was the 30th, so 2 or 3 days later, they kind of reassessed some stuff, bumped it up to the Ef4 damage. And I want to point out the time from this as well. It was 10:40 at night that this was reported as touchdown. So you think even if you get a long weekend from a break from school, usually most people, like even if you're more weather minded, you're just like, oh man, now I have to actually go to bed, get ready for the work week. So there's a whole different list, especially as a weather communicator and a forecaster. So I feel like, especially in the broadcast world, I realize I have so many other boxes and try to communicate the forecast. And especially if it's the middle of the night when people are trying to figure out, okay, I have to go back to work tomorrow. Kids probably have practice. Okay, we're officially into summer. I just want to pull the boat out tomorrow. Trying to figure out how to communicate the intensity of some of these storms, especially because, yeah, it was the middle of the night. It was the end of a holiday weekend, and the extent of the damage showed maximum sustained winds of 170 miles per hour. And this was a pretty decent, I'm trying to figure out remember where it shows. Yeah, maximum wind speeds 170 miles per hour, and the length was 19 miles. So this was pretty big system that was moving through, and this was just one of several tornadoes that made an appearance. So next couple slides, I'll start showing you some of the pretty pictures. First though, of course, the typical steps of even when you're on kind of taking on the weather communication side. And I think this would even apply to people who may be thinking about going into even an emergency management role, trying to encompass that whole weather ready nation feel of, it's not just when you're actively in the event, but kind of the before, during, and after. And a big part of the before and the preparation is when the first watch gets issued, or when the Storm Prediction Center actually says, hey, here's this special area we're watching. And again, kind of reiterating the time that made this so unique was 8:20 at night on Memorial Day. This was scheduled to go out lasting until 2 o'clock in the morning. So that in itself is just still that red flag of, this is not a time where a lot of people are going to be listening for their phone to go off and be focused on going to their safe spot. Okay, now I think we actually get into the pretty pictures. So starting off with my view from the studio, where I work now, we have a barren weather graphic system. So if you've had a chance to play with any of the graphics, sounds like Sean has a sweet hookup for you guys where you actually get to play with some of these too.
Some of the people in the meeting are actually enrolled in my class on how to use it right now. So
yay! So you guys are ahead of me too. This is my first time I've had or I guess I'm coming up on my 3-year anniversary, but this is the first station I've worked at that I've been able to have a barren studio. So there's all sorts of fun tools that we get to use alongside the radar. There's, I guess on the left-hand side, kind of the fun extra tools like our shear markers, which normally, especially if you're in a nowcasting situation, you kind of know where the area of concern is, but it's nice to almost double check your work by having the system say, oh yeah, here's where we're seeing the rotation. Or if you're so focused on one area, maybe there's another area of rotation that pops up. So that's where we've kind of found that the shear markers can be helpful. There's things like the tornado debris signature, which almost kind of can work as a reminder of, oh yeah, we got to make sure that we're remembering and checking on reports for where this storm rolled through. And especially if you're thinking about getting into broadcasting, one of the big questions, honestly, if you're related to meteorology at all, you probably have friends and family members who are always asking you about the weather anyway, and especially asking that question already of, when is it going to hit my house? So it's kind of nice that this system too kind of automatically puts those trackers up. So we can move on. And here's again kind of that shear marker where if you haven't seen it in action, shows up as a little cylinder to give you that reminder of, here are the 2 spots where there's rotation going on. So there's kind of a picture of what that looks like when it's turned on. And I think the next one just showed you the closer look of, there's the options of if I'm going live in the moment. So I think pauses at 10:44. So it was 10:41 when there was that first report of a touchdown of the tornado moving toward the Dayton area. And so here's all the fun things. And then I think the next slide shows that time frame of news directors and people who are always watching always want to know what's going on. Oh, thanks, Jenna. And so that way it also kind of reinforces that confidence of, okay, at this amount of time, or if you're in Troy, 2:42, this is when this storm is going over you. You need to be in your safe spot right now. And I think there's a lot of things that are, especially since again, I kind of like to think of myself in that communication role of making sure that it's that reassuring language and trying to make sure things are condensed. Where there's also the option in systems like this, if you don't want to click on the markers that automatically kind of do the math for you, there's also the option of finding like the leading edge of the storm, looking up to figure out, oh, it's moving northeast at 10 miles per hour, dragging it out and getting the automatic cities. But it's kind of nice to put those on. And even though all these tools are really nice, I think in a nowcasting situation, when you're in a severe storm situation, the thing that's going to help you out the most is just the plain radar. And since it sounds like all of you are in various stages of being a meteorologist or in the weather, water, and climate field, I'm sure your eyes automatically, like mine, are just drawn right to the pink. You know right away, this is going to be where there's stuff happening. And that also brings up the multitasking almost that you have to do of, if you know that it's going to be a day where there's severe thunderstorms capable of producing a tornado, that's kind of the first threat. But really, when you see those areas of the red, orange, pink, you know you're getting heavy rain. You know you have to be watching for that hail core moving right over Clayton. And that's why radar is the first tool I use. And the next slide is the velocity, which is the second one to say, wow, this is a big storm happening, but is it actually rotating? So just the simple radar and velocity, and something that has kind of played into that communication side and trying to keep along a clear, concise, and consistent message sometimes involves using simpler language. So my station in particular, we've decided instead of putting velocity, that I think even in Oklahoma City, you could probably, people are a little more weather aware, where you could probably get away saying, this is your storm relative velocity. But we kind of went with the simple terms of saying, this is our storm winds. And right away having the bar of toward and away. And you notice too, right away, just south of Clayton moving over toward Trotwood, you have those first kind of signs of rotation. So that is right where we had the start of that first tornado rolling through. And also, as someone who lived east of where all this was going on, it was very important to make sure that we knew what was heading our way and whether or not it was losing any of that intensification too. So next. Oh yeah, and then again, it was kind of fun to be able to check my work, see those shear markers, and here's the side by side. So figured we may as well throw in some pretty pictures that kind of reiterate, kind of, if we don't necessarily have that classic development, it's kind of nice to switch back and forth and say, okay, we're still watching this guy and trying to figure out along the way too of, is there really more of a threat of the rotation, or are we trying to focus more on hail being the thing that we need to warn people about? Now, granted, there's a big part of it that's teamwork. Normally during severe storms and events like this, I'll have access to weather service chat, and there'll be two of us in the office where one person's running radar and the other person is taking their turn on the wall. And so here's again kind of a timeline too of what we were just looking at. We were looking at that 10 o'clock p.m. time frame, but again, it's just one thing that just stands out so much with this and the uniqueness of it was around 9:20 was when we had those tornado watches and that statement put out by SPC saying that it'll be until 2 o'clock in the morning we're watching this. And 10:02, what was later confirmed as an Ef3 tornado, another Ef3 tornado at 10:25 p.m. 10:40 was what we were just looking at, that ended up being upgraded from an Ef3 tornado to that Ef4 tornado. And by this point, the system hadn't even really hit central Ohio and really hit the area where my DMA was. So we just knew it was the middle of the night. People were coming off their holiday weekend, and this is what's getting ready to head our way. So that's another thing too, is a lot of times in order to keep looking forward, you have to figure out what the system's been doing and if anything's going to slow it down. And 11:12, that's the next set of pretty pictures I'm going to show you, where there was some Ef3 tornado damage, and it was on the ground for about 20 minutes. So that's another thing too, where a lot of this information was kind of coming off in chat, which gave us that chance to kind of reiterate and give people a reason why, because even though we're more weather minded, we can open up our weather app and say, oh wow, look at that, we've got the rotation, we've got the strong storm. It's been interesting over the last couple of years figuring out what kind of words resonate with people and trying to figure out, oh, this is a big dangerous storm, the tornado's been on the ground for 20 minutes. That kind of clicks with people, that it's not going to be a instance where it may just skip over their house like it usually does. Next. Yay. And then here's one that looked almost textbook to me, where right about that time, I think it's kind of nice to almost check the work of the system. So I think that's almost what this one was, where I'm like, okay, you've got the shear marker just south of Huber Heights. Automatically, you can see a pretty long hail core with that bright purple, even the black showing up. And then even without the marker on there, you can even start to see the hook that's showing up. So remember, at this point, it's almost midnight. Most people probably don't even are more focused on trying to go to bed and get ready for work the next day. So that was an interesting thing, trying to figure out the language to make sure that we are saying, reiterating, maybe call your friends and family if they are out at this point, and also kind of trying to rethink about, oh, a storm like this has not been losing steam. Hail damage is going to be another big possibility. In fact, I think it was between 11 o'clock and midnight that we had nearly 2-inch hail with this storm. So that was just beating down, probably keeping people up in the midst of everything as well. And then I think the next one gets rid of the shear marker, so you can actually see a little bit more of that kind of classic hook that's been setting up. And then the next one just reiterates more of oh, there we go. I advanced it one more slide, because I'm like, even though that was the time of the touchdown, here's the one where you can just look at it and say, that doesn't look right. That looks like there's going to be a big situation going on, and it is just marching on east with almost nothing that seems to be standing in its way. And of course, again, kind of matching up with that classic setup where you've got the hook, you've got the hail upwards of 1.5 to 1.75 inches heading over toward Yellow Springs. Then on velocity, we were able to see all of that really strong rotation and that very clear couplet that was showing up, where heading over towards Xenia. And at this point too, and I'm probably throwing out some cities that may not resonate much with people, where Yellow Springs is an area where there's a decent population. If nothing else, people, especially on holiday weekends, would go out and visit. Xenia is a place that has had some historic tornadoes. So that's an area too, where at this point too, people are noticing, wow, this has been on the ground for a while. This is still going. And also with that strong return on the velocity, it also gave us that heads up that there's not a whole lot that's slowing this guy down. So I think the next one goes over more timelining. Oh no. And here's the side by side. So here's the really pretty picture where you'll notice there's pretty much the gate to gate shear that's been showing up from this really strong system, and almost a small scale classic example of what you do not want to see at the end of your holiday weekend. So that was one thing too that just continued to give us all of those red flags of it heading our direction. And then I think that was the first time that we saw the tornado debris signature actually show up, which I think at that point it was over in the area where there ended up being that Ef3, then Ef4 damage. And so that was almost one of those mental notes of, oh, okay, now that we have the debris signature, we have at this point nearly 2-inch hail that's rolling through, and it's continuing to head toward one of the most populated areas in the state of Ohio. And at this point, it's 11:30 at night as well. So that just continues to add to the crazy list of things that are going on. And at this point too, in really most TV stations on East Coast and West Coast, instead of the 10 p.m. newscast, they have an 11 p.m. So by this point, I think it was a little after 10 o'clock started going live, blew out our 11 o'clock newscast, just keeping around that wall-to-wall coverage for the strong thunderstorms and the tornado threat that was pretty much imminent at this point. And next. So, oh yeah, here's kind of reiterating that 10:15, it was about 10:15 that our station cut on and continued on until 2:45 in the morning. And again, we're kind of in that middle part of the state where things were really just starting to get going at midnight. And it was for either some combination of watching for that tornado threat, watching for severe thunderstorm, that was not only creating that massive hail and the heavy downpour. At this point, there was also flash flooding to deal with at the end of people's holiday weekend. And anytime that you're going to have tornado damage, there's going to be so many reports of just strong straight line wind damage as well. So I'm sure over at the National Weather Service, they had that never ending list of trying to figure out, even before midnight, where they were going to line up their reports, or where they were going to go out for their storm damage reports before even really being halfway through with the event. So next. And so continue on the timeline for really my part of the Columbus area. Even though Columbus and the majority of the county continued under tornado warnings, the tornadoes that made an appearance were south of the city toward more of a less populated area. But at the same time, it was after 1 o'clock in the morning at 1:17 that there was Ef3 damage over toward the Laurelville area. And with that too, even some of the Ef1 damage that came through just after 1 o'clock in the morning impacted an elementary school. So especially as things started moving east between midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, that's when it was actually moving through neighborhoods where there were elementary schools, where people were having to actually take shelter. And normally that would be kind of our in-between time. So I think the next few kind of go through the pretty pictures again of, here's Circleville, where I think you can look at it right away and see not only does it have that crazy hook going on, but yeah, lots of very clear rotation that was showing up as well. And another thing too is that the news director I have, she has had a really big emphasis on trying to make sure we're talking to where the people are. And Columbus is an area where most people are either in the city or somewhere within the county commuting in. So when a radar would look like this at one point, it would be important to show a view like this to say, hey, everyone who's over in the Columbus area, you're in the clear. You're probably not even hearing the rainfall right now, but make sure that you are continuing, if you do step outside, to have your sturdy shoes on and ready to go. It's going to be down towards Circleville that we really need to draw our attention. And so trying to figure out the right wording to use to make sure that you're continuing to still talk to the majority of the population, but also saying, if you're in this area, you're in the clear, now let's go to where the activity's happening, which again, right away, we were able to see not only a scary looking hook on the radar, followed by all of the winds showing that very clear sign of rotation. And again, this ended up being Ef3 damage at 1 o'clock in the morning, which was already on a huge line of storms that had just been rolling through since sunset. And then, yay. And then that may just be exactly the same thing again. And then there's, once again, over toward Laurelville, just watching for the storm, the rotation that's been rolling through. And it just continued to give us that reminder, and why we were on the air till after 2 o'clock in the morning was saying, okay, majority people watching, you're good. It's just down to the south. Let's talk to our friends down there. And that's something too that has been an interesting thing trying to figure out as a broadcast meteorologist, of making sure that you're talking to everyone, because I'm sure you've seen even the viral videos of the meteorologist in Dayton saying, I'm here to save people's life. You can watch The Bachelor another time, or things like that. Because if you do plan on going into something like TV meteorology, there's unfortunately a big population that doesn't care if the tornado is about to rip apart their grandma's house. You just cut into NASCAR, or you just cut into their TV show. And that is the most important thing in their life in that moment. So you've probably heard, if anyone's interested in going into broadcasting, the importance of having a thick skin and trying to figure out your priorities. And it's especially in events like this, where fortunately in an event like this, if you're watching TV at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's a pretty small population and you probably are just turning it on to figure out something like this. But it's incredible the amount of emails that you may end up getting that are not so excited about the life-threatening information that you're trying to get out. So here's one more.
I know a lot of them saw the picture Katie tweeted out like a year or two ago.
Yes, there's all sorts of interesting comments that you get out, but then you see a side by side like this where it honestly looks like it should actually be at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon as opposed to 1 o'clock in the morning, from just how clear you were able to look at the radar and the rotation and say, that's not good. This is definitely going to cause some damage. And unfortunately, it did and resulted in some cleanup for the next couple of days. And I think that's, yeah, the next part of course, there's the storm doesn't only happen when it's on the radar. There's, of course, that before, during, and after. Most of the excitement, especially for people who enjoy watching the radar, are all about the during, where before you're just kind of excited. You need to make sure you're getting the word out, but you're kind of in that preparation mode to watch the storm develop, especially if you get to be the person who's out there chasing it. But of course, the after is another big part, and especially for anything linked to the community. So whether you're going to be doing a broadcast aspect, if you get tied into an emergency management aspect, or even from a weather service perspective, to go out, assess the damage, and figure out what kind of help is going to start heading that way. So my role the next day was going out with a photographer, and I, on occasion, will be able to link up with the weather service to do a survey, but on a day like that, we just kind of called to see if they had a few places they were going to check out and basically did our own survey. So if anyone watching this is planning on going to the weather service, thank you in advance for working so well with your media partners. I apologize for us that we call to follow along with all of your surveys, but I appreciate with all the coordination. So the next few slides kind of show the pictures of that I posted. As I'm looking at these, I'm like, oh, this was a post from the day after. I'm sure I could have taken better pictures. But one of the things, as I've had a chance to go out and look at damage the day after, one of the big things I look at is the trees. And the big thing that you look at the trees and the debris is trying to figure out the initial, was it a tornado or was it just really strong straight winds? And in an instance where I was able to go out to Trotwood, where they had upgraded wind damage closer to 200 miles per hour, you actually got to see the scattered direction of the trees, as opposed to a lot of times when I've gone out to try to find damage or where damage surveys were done, I'll see a house where there's a whole line of trees that clearly snapped and fell one way, and then their roof debris is right in the middle of it. So that's one of the clearest signs and one of the most initial things when you're looking at it to say, which one is it? That right away you'll be able to tell, and gives that big visual cue too. So especially from the forecasting side. And then another big thing that I always remember too, that I'm sure you guys have had to memorize this for a test or something as well, is just trying to figure out the extreme wind speeds that come with tornadoes and tornado damage. It always blows my mind, especially since I was out there looking at the potential for wind speeds that had gone over 200 miles per hour, which is almost an unfathomable speed for me. Even Ef3, trying to comprehend that that was a tornado spinning winds around faster than a car's probably going on the highway. And then the next slide shows just one I grabbed from the weather service for exactly what I'm looking at, and from having a chance to talk to people out on the survey from the weather service, literally checking the boxes of what they're looking at. So especially when I had a chance to go live from sites that were Ef3, Ef4 damage, trying to figure out the big things that I was looking at on the site was, okay, not only the initial, what direction are the trees all laying, but the well-constructed homes, because Ef0 could still result in a barn being blown over. So that's a thing that you'll see a lot, is kind of the initial, even if you follow weather service chat. But then as soon as you start to look at the houses with tarps on them and whole neighborhoods, kind of you start to instantly see the difference between where one neighborhood may have part of a roof gone versus there were whole neighborhoods that you could hardly see what was left of the first story of their house. And that was just almost one of the most mind-blowing things. So there's again kind of my picture. As I'm looking at it, I'm realizing a little more mediocre than I probably felt like it was in the moment. But I think you can see a little bit of how the trees were laying different ways. So that was kind of my initial. And then I think the neighborhood that I was in kind of caught the tail end of it, but had several houses and barns that were just completely collapsed, trees that looked like somebody had just taken a saw and chopped them off as well. And it was just incredible to see kind of the differences of that. And then the house that I ended up talking to, or kind of hanging around talking to the owners about, they were almost one of the houses that just had a little bit of damage. Meanwhile, this is what was happening to their neighbor's house. And I think there's one more on there. Oh yeah, there's kind of the wider view of that I feel like almost shows, and I'm sure being in Oklahoma or having an interest in weather, many of you have seen similar pictures where it looks like down the road, like that house behind them, it's totally fine. The house beside it missing a roof and trees have been uprooted. So that's one thing that I've always found fascinating too, of just the impact of the weather and how long lasting it can be. And then, of course, one more thing too that is always kind of nice is eventually you hit that point of, okay, how are people coming together? How are they helping each other? So here were a few of the pictures that I was able to take of, I think it was either a company or a neighbor that gave a generator, found water and gave them, because that's another one of the long lasting impacts from a severe storm that if you aren't in the neighborhood that was hit, you don't think about. You may not have power for a while. You may not even have access to running water for a while. So that's always one of my favorite pluses is as soon as people start coming together with their chainsaws, when you have those people coming together with their water just to make sure that everyone's okay. And then I don't think I added a picture of this, but I've done a few of the follow-ups with FEMA before you have to move on to, okay, we survived this one. How are we going to make sure that we're better prepared for the next one? So since we're going into spring severe weather season, even in Ohio, clearly from this, we get strong storms and tornadoes as well. So the reason that I actually had some of this information in our system is my weather team, we've been running through our severe weather plan, and we decided if we need to take turns running the radar for each other, making sure we know where all the right buttons are, and even rehearsing what would we do in a severe weather situation, we were able to pull up this data and take turns running the radar for each other, or kind of going over, if this was the scenario, we're going to pause the radar at this time, you're on the wall, talk us through what's going on. And a good reminder that to keep people prepared and going, kind of back to even that weather ready nation, kind of working together as a team. Severe weather safety week, big push from the National Weather Service. I love that I had a whole week where it was all about focusing on one type of severe weather, having a minute or two in my broadcast to say, today we're focusing on flooding. Did you know that it only takes 6 inches of moving water to sweep away a person? A foot of moving water can sweep away your car. And Ohio has some really big potholes. Half the time you can't see the bottom on a dry day. So make sure that you're getting prepared for those. And followed up with working our way down through tornado safety and the safe place selfie. And I think that was a good reminder for not only to make sure that our viewers knew what was going on and how to plan, but also made sure that we were reviewing our own plan so it kept us accountable. And also, this is something that I think you guys can use too, regardless of how you plan on applying a meteorology degree, is if you have a social media platform that you occasionally will post weather stuff to. I'll admit, when I started getting a weather page and converting things over to just weather, it felt a little weird, but you become a trusted source, even if it's with your friends and family, by actually posting those things, by taking a minute to do a Facebook Live and say, here's what I'm watching. And even by doing those on weeks where it's just, here's a few things to know about flood safety or tornado safety during severe weather preparedness week, or just, hey, it's a holiday weekend, here's what to expect or what's going on for the weekend. It really helps you to become more of a trusted source. And a big part too is always going to be communication and making sure that you're talking to your team as well. So it's kind of looking back at events like this that is always that refresher of, okay, are we going to be prepared for the next time? And what can we do better? How can we continue to keep serving our community better and just continue to keep protecting life and property as best as we can? And yeah, I think that's the last one. So again, I'm Liz. If you guys have any questions or want to reach out to me, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. There's my work email, or you can reach out to Jenna or Sean. They have my contact info too. And I think that's my excitement of my rambling. So if you guys have any questions, I can hang around and try to answer some.
Oh, thanks, Liz. Jenna was trying to close, so I took it.
Thanks,
Oh,
Anna and
Hey,
Sean.
hey,
I struggle with
thank-
technology more than I
Yeah,
should admit.
thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on. I came in a little late. Now, were you on like during the event, or were you like just yeah, I'm sorry, I just arrived, so I missed like 90% of what you were saying.
no worries,
Yes.
Eric.
Oh, no, you're good. So that we had to reschedule or shuffle things around. So I was there for kind of the initial of getting things going. And then I was scheduled to kind of help with things in the morning before going out to look at the storm survey. So I wasn't actually in the studio during the main event, but I was back in the studio for, let me see, I guess it was this last last Labor Day that we had a bunch of tornadoes that suddenly spun up. And so it was the same kind of action plan that we were able to put back into motion.
Oh, you're talking about again. Oh yeah, that day where like the storm prediction center predicted like nothing, and then like a tornado. That was the weirdest day. Just like a bunch of tornado warnings gone out of no. That was an absolute blessing that nobody died that day.
I will admit I was in the same boat too, because I was casually hanging out, had golf on in the background, was getting ready to do a Facebook Live to say, hey, in for the evening shows today, and watching a few thunderstorms, but we'll be back on at 6 o'clock, enjoy golf. And then all of a sudden our weekend evening meteorologist kind of called me and was like, hey, just want to make sure you're watching the storms. Are you good by yourself? I'm like, yeah, I think we're fine. And then I looked over, I was like, oh, actually, I see a red box a county over. So, it's free. It's
Yeah,
free. I hope I
that-
don't need backup.
Yeah, that day in 2016, I remember I was with my friend, and he was I was going to class, and it was a day where I liked to look at the weather, but it was kind of a day I was like, nothing's really happening. 2% risk wasn't even in your area, and I looked at the bot, and I started looking at the radar. I'm just like, there's just like a row of supercells with all these red boxes. I'm just like, whoa, okay, this came out of nowhere. It just kept going. It was just like, and they were going over the same areas too. It was weird.
Yes, it was very, and the fact too that it started off where we're like, oh, it's just off to the west. Oh no, it's moving right over Columbus on the holiday.
Oh yeah.
And that's an interesting thing too, where I feel like one of the weird quirks of Columbus weather is it only seems to be like Labor Day and Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden things escalate real fast.
Yeah, I noticed that about big trying to forecast. There's always one day where there's like a 2% risk. Like every year, there's like a 2% risk, and then all of a sudden, there's a tornado outbreak out of nowhere. Like Marshalltown was the same thing. There was a 2% risk, and then all of a sudden, we had a bunch of tornadoes spawn up. And I know I'm talking about Iowa, but it was just like one of those days where like there's nothing, and then all of a sudden, whoa, we got all these tornadoes everywhere. What the heck is going on?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll talk all day, so I'll let other people talk. I'll talk all day if I do about this. I wish I was here before. So
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Like Jenna said, feel free to type in chat too if you don't want to unmute. One thing that I think a lot of you will be interested in, and it's not exactly tornado, but Liz is a perfect person to talk about it, is one of the other ways that you could get to go to to AMS a second time. Liz, do you want to give your spiel about AMS and volunteering at the conference?
Yes. So I was really fortunate that I was able to find AMS and get connected the summer after my freshman year of college. And the way I was able to do that was by volunteering as a student assistant. And the big annual conference, there's an application process, and it's great because it covers the cost of your conference. You're sitting in half the sessions. You get to go and like participate and listen to the other ones. But the first AMS conference that I was able to volunteer at was just one that was closest to me. It was, I think, in Omaha. So grew up in Kansas City, had some friends who were in college in Omaha, and was able to start volunteering. Basically, I reached out to the AMS, and I think online they have formal like forms so you can do the specialized conference. That one happened to be I think a WAF and NWP. So my first AMS conference was actually for numerical weather prediction. So as someone who had just finished my freshman year of college and was just trying to figure out, do I want to do broadcast? Do I even want to do weather? Even though a lot of it like was way over my head, a little intimidating, it was so nice to actually figure out this is a community I want to be in, because the connection part of it, and you guys have probably figured out too, with as difficult as a lot of the classes are, in order to honestly, I feel like survive, unless you're like Sean and can just like code and do all that stuff in your sleep. A lot of the time you need that support of sometimes even just surviving, whether it, for me, it was Calc 2 was terrible. My calc-based physics 1 class was terrible. And so I definitely needed the support of people to like get through those so I could just keep moving on. And even though, yeah, I was like, I've especially found on the broadcast side, and I know that we are not alone on this, that a lot of some of those upper level, like just math and science classes may have been more of a struggle than reading the radar, than actually getting to the heart of it. So I think even going to my first couple AMS conferences was realizing this is a community I want to be a part of. And you guys have probably figured out, if nothing else, if you've gone through freshman through senior year, or even freshman to sophomore year, the community gets smaller and smaller. So we are a very small, tight-knit community. So I think that I've been able to get connected to that community. I've been able to find mentors and been able to just feel like I'm doing, on days where I feel like I even am wondering, I'm like, am I doing a purpose? Am I contributing to anything? It's kind of fun to know that I'm connected to all these different parts of it. See a few people saying yes, Calc 2. I'm glad it's not just me. Thought I'd be the first to admit that.
OU may be a little bit bigger than we were at Mizzou, Liz, but it's the same thing.
That's what I wondered. And on my team, I have a Purdue grad and a Penn State grad, and they've all said the same thing, where they're like, I don't know, we're all a pretty small community when it comes down to it. We've all survived. We're all the same kind of weird too. So I'm sorry if you haven't figured that out yet.
Well, any more questions for Liz, guys?
I was gonna say she's a great resource for, like I said, for AMS and stuff too. So even if it's questions about AMS, she can give her spiel. So
Yes. And if anyone's thinking about going into broadcasts and has any specific questions to that, or trying to figure out whether or not, even I've only been on a broadcast track, but I've even talked to friends who have thought about transferring into just a forecasting role, which puts you on that weird sleep schedule or shift work, or even what it's like to move halfway across the country. It's all part of the adventure. So it's kind of fun to embrace it. And that's when I feel like that community that I've been fortunate enough to find within AMS in the weather world, we're all here to support you guys.
or just if you have questions of how she dealt with me. So,
Oh gosh.
You're fun. Sean's a good resource too.
Well, if that's it, thank you so much for coming, Liz. It was a great talk. I'm always partial to hear about something that goes on in Ohio whenever I can here. So, you know me. I had to sneak Ohio in somehow now. I don't know.
Thanks for coming. I'm
Thanks,
originally
guys.
from Maryland, so. So.
and while we're wrapping up, just to reiterate what Jenna said, elections are at our banquet at the end of April. If you are interested in volunteering for any of the appointed positions in the board next year, please email me. Or if you just have questions of what different positions are even going to be available, email me. I'll be happy to give you some guidance or let you know. We always want people to be involved, especially next year as we start ramping back up to in-person operations.
And if you're thinking that you want to be a shift leader, hold on to that for this summer. So we'll start taking, testing the water for who wants to be a shift leader in the fall this summer. So, well, if that's it, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you again, Liz. I think everyone loved having you. So I will see you all at the OWL banquet.